So I've started to record now. So the agenda, I want to keep things as they were in the past, so we have some continuity. But I want to also be brief because most of us don't want to sit too terribly long. But I still want to have some of those elements, such as the bird sightings, identification challenge, some other business. One of the things that we'll start to instill moving forward is a photo contest that I'll talk about in just a moment. This evening we have a budget vote, some things about upcoming field trips, and then we will also talk about things that you want to bring up related to various topics that pertain to the group. So let's go first with bird sightings. So if you would like to utilize the chat, or if you are able and capable of using your chat, feel free to share what you've have been seeing, because I've been mostly inside and would like to live vicariously through you.
Well, I'll start it off. I was up at the Kipta Peak Hawk Watch when it opened up in 1 September, and there was several Mississippi kites that were flying there. So that was very nice to see them. Unfortunately, I did not see the swallow-tailed kites that had come earlier in the day. I was not there early in the day, but seeing the Mississippi kites were very nice.
Oh, that's awesome. Anyone else have anything cool or not so cool?
Well,
we had our first Baltimore Oriole today.
Oh, that's awesome.
The other morning, we were leaving on a trip about 4 o'clock, and we, for the first time here at our property, we heard a barred owl. We hear great horns all the time, but this is the first barred owl, so we're really excited, even though it's probably not a big deal for anybody else.
That's still awesome for you. Good yard bird, and any bird's an exciting bird. I think
about 2 weeks ago we had a leucistic grackle, which was quite creative.
Oh, so Gwen mentioned that she was staying with her mom in North Carolina, and they had a pair of chats. That's an awesome bird too.
Hey, Sean, last week during the Craney survey, there's lots of shorebirds moving through. We had 4 buff-breasted sandpipers, whimbrels, marble godwits, just a lot of things coming through. So if anybody's near any kind of marshes or beaches, you're starting to see a lot of shorebirds come through.
Oh, that's still one sandpiper I haven't seen among many, but buff-breasted is one that I need to track down one day. Yeah, it's nice that things are coming through. Maybe that's some stability that we can have going out and visiting.
We had a glossy ibis on our creek. First time I've ever seen one in all my years here.
Awesome.
We had a couple of Nashville warblers out in Matthews County.
Well, it does seem like we're all seeing a lot of good stuff. Great. So since we seem to be seeing things, let's put your skills to the test. Let's try that again. Put your skills to the test with 2 easy identification challenges. So you can put it in the chat, or you can yell it out. Of course, if you're on mute, I won't hear you, but you can still yell it out. So Gwen is saying red start, and Gwen wins a magic sticker for the evening, or Walter, whoever happens to be there, but it's Gwen's name. So what we can look for is a gray cap and an olive gray above, and yellow wing and tail patches. And it is the American redstart, which, if you remember, this is the same slide I gave last September. And so I was just hoping we might remember something from a year ago. And then another really easy one this time, because that redstart picture wasn't the best redstart picture, but I think this is a nice photo of something that we may be seeing. So beady black eye, a whitish eye ring, brownish olive above, brown streak in underparts, plumage is bright yellow on the rump. That's a yellow warbler, and it's not so nice breeding plumage. Okay, so we didn't do so well, so that's -5, everyone. -5 for the day. So one of the things that we would like to do, because you see some awesome stuff, and a lot of you are photographers, but even if you're not photographers, is to start to have a monthly photo contest. And I'm going to encourage you to send those photos to myself. I know some have been sending them to Tom as well as Mike, which is all fine. That's perfectly okay, but I put me for there. We're going to make a Dropbox where we can share them and put them up on the Facebook, as well as have them presented during the meeting. And then we'll take a poll at the next meeting to vote for the pictures that we like the best. Maybe it's showing some bird behavior. Maybe it's something that's relatively rare. And those will be featurettes within our newsletter, which is, I think, a nice way to celebrate the diversity of our region, but also bringing us club members together and appreciate everything that we're doing and seeing out in the environment. So Tom nominated this photo, and I'm not going to tell you who the photos are by. I just have a few photos tonight to think about. So this is one, which I actually mentioned earlier this evening. And then we have the secondary photo, which is a very nice photograph. And another photo. Now, Tom sent things through email, so the resolution's a little bit low, but I wanted to just get us off on the spirit. Remember, things will be posted also on the Facebook. So let's talk a little bit through committees. Now, I know there is at least one new person who's visiting us for the evening. And those person, we welcome you. And I know Gwen had a hand in some of that. Am I correct, Gwen?
Tom, welcome to Kathy Rector. She contacted me in March and wanted to know more about our club and to start participating, but unfortunately we shut down for COVID. But she hadn't forgot us, and I believe that I saw that her name was listed tonight. So I want to say welcome.
Yep. So welcome again. I know there's not much going on for hospitality. I have a glass of water, so we'll pretend Jane and Diane provided that for me. Maybe next time they can send some snacks over. Tom, do you have anything about the newsletter? I know this time was pretty nice. We had a book review, I think, from Pete, and some other nice pictures and things that were going on. But of course, feel free to comment about upcoming issues or things that you would like to see, Tom.
Well, what's upcoming is, besides the photo contest, the next edition will have an interview with a description of Jane Frigo's yard, which was just a paradise for birds, and couldn't squeeze that into this last newsletter. And it was very much appreciated what you and Pete and Harry and Rochelle, Diane had sent in. And I liked the material from Wendy and Ellis, especially hearing that good news about the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, the conversion of the birds to ripraps or Fort Wool, whichever you prefer.
No, absolutely. Okay, great. Mike, do you happen to have anything related to publicity? No, so
I got nothing, nothing new.
Okay. And then if you haven't all looked at the webpage, I think it's one of the nicer web pages out there that Wendy and Ellis are doing an excellent job posting things. Is there anything you want to add about the webpage, Ellis and
Well,
Wendy?
John Adair has done a lot of work on the webpage
Okay.
with very little guidance from me. You now have the ability to pay dues on the webpage, which is sort of exciting. It was a lot of work. John put a lot of effort into that. And I think that's the main thing, I believe.
All right. Thanks, John. And we'll see some of John's work in just a moment. Speaking of membership and John. So John put together a nice way to look at how you can continue to support the Hampton Roads Bird Club by either having your dues mailed to him. Also, we can deliver them to 2 bird supply stores. And he set up this nice account for PayPal so you can pay securely with a credit card. So I do want to say that our membership is great. And while we might not always meet in person and close, to consider continuing to support. So if you just go to the webpage, and here's our webpage, it's beautiful. But if you just slightly scroll down, so this is the webpage, slightly scroll down, up, slightly scroll down. This is the link, here it is, the link for membership. So one click, there you are, and you can pay your dues right off the homepage. So just one click and you'll be able to address paying your dues, plus all the wonderful things that the webpage has always had, such as meetings and newsletter, other club activities, and things about local birding. So John, would you be kind enough, and thank you again for setting all that up, to take just a moment to talk about our budget, because we need a club vote to accept this proposed budget.
Okay, well, it was a real easy do working on the webpage, except for PayPal. It was a real challenge for me to set up those 2 easy buttons. But once I figured it out, it really was pretty straightforward. And those are just one-click pay now buttons. So it's real easy to do the credit card thing. Our balances in the bank are good. This is about where we are from year to year. We're usually a little above what we were the year before, even though at the beginning of each year, it looks like, oh no, we're not going to make it. We'll never make this balance. But somehow it seems to work out in the end. This year, it's certainly going to be a different year until we get back into meeting together. The only known income we'll have this year, which makes it more important for all our wonderful members who want to keep in the family, and we hope you'll stay and bring others, is our membership dues. And they amount to our $1,350, which, as it turns out this year, since we can't buy many social fun things like turkeys for Christmas and cookouts, maybe we'll be back in the cookout business by next summer, let's hope. There shouldn't be much in a number of the areas that we usually spend. Another area is that's usually a costly one is the newsletter. Tom has done a yeoman's effort in keeping that low even in the past, but now he's unable to get the letter professionally printed. So we've narrowed down the number of people that need hard copies, and Tom has agreed to print those out and mail them. We do buy the stamps for Tom, so and I think he has a good trove already bought up. I won't go over the different organizations we contribute to. Those are annual, designated by the bylaws in our club, and we post those in the latter part of each year. The education fund is one that we dedicated to
It's the Virginia Breeding Bird Atlas.
Bleeding Bird Analysts. They're putting it together, putting it to bed, and a lot of our members participated in the data collection for that, and so that'll be wrapping up, and we put that $500 into that. I think that's about it. The website, the website we prepaid out of last year's budget for the next 3 years. So that's going to be a huge savings for us. And our website cost this year should only be about $15 for the domain name. So that's all I got.
Okay. So you should all see a poll that you can vote. And then these are all anonymous votes, but you're able to vote, and then we'll be able to just go through that way. And so instead of trying to get everyone to type in the chat or say something, just use the poll that I have launched, and you should be able to vote in that poll.
Can you put that back on the screen, please?
This disappeared.
It's gone, Sean.
All right, let me try it again. I might have not set the time long enough, so let me relaunch. I know I have 6 yes votes. Okay. Is that better now?
Yeah.
There was enough time to submit it.
Will you accept a mail-in ballot?
Yes, well. Yeah, Bill, we can do that. Hopefully it's a yes. Yes, yeah, vote twice. So I'll move on because I think that's open just for a little bit, so you can take a chance to look at that. I'm going to move on to the slide about Hog Island and our upcoming field trip. I've tried to make the important points in red that I'll go over, and then I'll ask our new field trip coordinators to take over, but it's going to be coming up, I think, in 2 weeks, right? The 19th of September. Some of the things to do to protect all the members are going to have a tinier list of people who go, which will be a first come, first serve kind of means. But of course, if you get waitlisted, you get priority for upcoming field trips. But I'll turn that over to Harry now if he wanted to provide some further detail for that.
Well, at the current time, we've got 8 people for Hog Island, which is half of the numbers that we're going to be taking. There's 2 so-called guides, that's Rochelle and I, and then 14 others. And we'll have 16 total if at the maximum. But right now we've got 8, so that's 1 group. And if we get 1 more, we'll split the groups. And right now, everyone who has signed up wants to do walking and auto along the trail. And so we may end up with 2 groups that want to walk and go on the auto trail. But if there are some who just want to go on the auto trail, we'll do one of those. We are going, the next trip will be to Eastern Shore on the 17th of October. With regard to the Hog Island trip, there will be a small fee for the wildlife management area. Again, all the items that were previously sent out with regard to social distancing, masks, etc., will be included in this trip as all others until we get some relief from that.
Okay,
Great. And then again, planting the seed of
question.
17th
Yes.
of October.
At the security point for Hog Island, do we have to do anything with real ID? You know, is just a driver's license okay, or do Do we know
Just,
whether,
yeah, just a driver's license is fine. We went down about 10 days ago just to check it out. Yeah, each person needs a driver's license or some other ID. You got to remember there's two things here. One is that it's Dominion, and then you go through Dominion to get to the wildlife management area. And we will be meeting in that wildlife management area. There's a turnoff right after you enter. There's a sign there and parking lot, that pullover that's on the left, and it's good viewing area right there to start. And then we'll split into groups if we need to and go from there. I'll be getting passes for everyone who has signed up about 2 days beforehand. So you need, if you're going to go, you need to let me know fairly soon so that we can do that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Harry. Just two things for business, because I do want to turn it over to Chance for the evening, because we're taking a little bit of time, but I know it's our first meeting and that's okay. But Dave Singletary was talking at the beginning of our meetup, noting that he had some rain barrels that are on their way with his Eagle Scouts that will help to install them, and also some bat and bird houses. So if you're interested in helping out those Eagle Scouts, you can contact Dave Singletary. Am I forgetting anything, Dave?
Yes, I've got a number of all people want in the rain barrels, and the Scouts will deliver and install, and they're free. We ask for a $10 donation for gas if you want to, but you don't have to. Now we will hope to do this spring. I've been looking for kids to do this for 10 months, and all of a sudden 2 weeks ago I get 2 of them that want to do rain barrels. So I've got plenty of rain barrels coming. Probably one of them will take place in about 6 weeks, and the next one after that, a few weeks after that. So kind of 2 shots at it. You send me an email, let me know so I can put you on the spreadsheet. And I think I have 8 birders already on it, but I would like for everybody to reconfirm since it's been so long. And I know people wanted them in the spring, but I can't produce something that Scouts don't get on after. So just pop me an email, david.singletary@gmail.com. Put you on the list, and then we'll let you know about a week ahead. We anticipate a Saturday to be delivering, or you can pick them up. We may be doing it at Todd Stadium. Any questions?
So check out the chat, Dave, because someone confirmed Bob Abraham. And if you could also put your email in the chat so people could look that way, that would be awesome.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
All right, Pete, I'm turning it over to you so you can introduce our speaker for the evening.
All right, so our speaker is Chance Hines. He's a research biologist for the Center for Conservation Biology up in Williamsburg. Chance has been working with CCB since 2014. His current role places him in charge of monitoring red-cockaded woodpecker populations at Piney Grove and Great Dismal Swamp. He also gets a chance to study his beloved passerines while researching wintering Ipswich sparrows along the Atlantic coast. His graduate work at Old Dominion University focused on fall migratory songbird ecology. His talk will cover his research on migrating songbirds and what they eat to fuel their long journey. Chance, over to you.
Thank you, Pete. I'm going to pull up my presentation real quick. All right. You know, initially I was scheduled to do this presentation in the spring, and I was thinking I was going to have to change this up quite a bit and talk about spring foraging. But because of COVID, it ended up here in the fall, and the timing is just about perfect as autumn migration is here. So we'll go ahead and start the talk. Before I talk about my research and Here we have a picture of a gray jay. This is a bird that does not migrate and is actually really unique because it actually nests during the winter when it's at its coldest. And this bird actually lives in very cold climates. And it can do this because it gathers all the food it will need for the winter when it's warm, and it caches it in different places and can remember where those caches are. And it can feed its nestlings when it's cold. But most birds can't do that. Most birds need to escape these freezing temperatures up north, so they go down south to the tropics where everything's warm and lush and there's plenty of food to eat. And birds make really remarkable journeys to do this. Bar-tailed godwit is probably the most famous of the birds because it makes the longest continuous journey. It travels about 7 days straight from Alaska to Southeast Asia without stopping for food or water, which is really incredible. We think about running for 7 days straight and not drinking or eating. There's no way a human being could do this, but birds are capable of really amazing things. My research focused on songbirds, not shorebirds. They're much smaller typically. For example, the blackpoll warbler, much smaller bird, but still undertakes a really amazing journey. About 1,700 miles in 3 days across the Atlantic Ocean. It's really incredible, especially for a bird like this. It really only weighs about 13 grams. And, you think about that, that's 2.5 nickels, something like that. And think about how much energy you have to pack in just that small of a package to travel 3 days, just continuous exercise. But most birds don't make these continuous journeys, or at least most songbirds. They're not flying from Northeast America to Brazil. Most of these songbirds are using stopover locations. This is a little image of spring stopover and showing how these birds use stopover spots in South America and then on their way north. But the same thing occurs in the fall. But along the way, these birds face several challenges. You guys are going to the Eastern Shore here pretty soon. You may get lucky and see a really great Sharpie day where you just have thousands of Sharpies flying around. I mean, some of those days are just really incredible out there. They're just everywhere around you. But for a songbird, it's probably a really terrifying time because these Sharpies and Cooper's hawks, they're out looking for those songbirds and trying to eat them. Challenge these birds face nowadays that they used to not have to face are collisions. You look out in the cityscapes that we have and the communication towers, all the tall buildings. These buildings and all these structures are really taking a pretty good toll on the birds. You look at those numbers in the bottom left graphic there, you see it's just hundreds of millions of birds are being killed every year by wind turbines, communication towers, buildings, all kinds of things. And, you look at the top left there, those are numbers, I believe that was on the southern coast of Texas one year. There's some really bad fog and a bunch of birds hit buildings. You see those are beautiful spring migrants. It's really terrible that this happens. But another really terrible challenge that these birds face is weather. And you can see up there at the top center, there's a whimbrel, and that's Center for Conservation Biology is applying a little transmitter on it. And that bird was tracked. And that bird ended up getting caught up in a hurricane. And that hurricane derailed its migration, as you can see on that left picture. It got caught up in the hurricane and it ended up having to stop over on some islands for a while, but it actually completed its migration. But you can imagine for a small songbird getting caught up in some of these storms, a lot of them aren't making it. But some of these birds that get caught up in these storms or even smaller storms end up in what they call a migratory fallout. And if you ever see this, it's a really incredible event. These photos are from an island out in the Atlantic. I don't recall the name of it, but it's really the best photos I could find on the internet. And you just look at the density of these birds on this island and it's really incredible. And you can see all different species of birds, Blackburnians, Canadas, blackpolls, several ovenbirds. There's even a dick sisel back there. And I haven't seen a fallout like this, but I've seen a few fallouts where the birds were just really thick, and those all occurred on the eastern shore of Virginia. And that's primarily because on the eastern shore of Virginia, it's not an island, but it's a peninsula that tapers from the north to the south. So a lot of these young birds and some birds that aren't really familiar with the surrounding areas, they might get blown off course and get blown into the ocean, but these birds are kind of following the coast south because some of the older birds, they'll take a more inland route, but these young birds don't really know the best way to go, so they just follow the coast. And what ends up happening as these birds get blown off course, they fly back to land and continue south, they encounter the Chesapeake Bay. And when they encounter the Chesapeake Bay, they kind of turn down at that, turn back around right at the southern tip, and you'll get a phenomenon known as morning flight. And if you're down there at sunrise or just before sunrise, a lot of people will go to the Sunset Hotel just down there at the very near the southern tip, and you can see this morning flight. And it's really incredible. Some mornings you'll see thousands of birds flying north. But what ends up happening here is you just get a ton of birds down at the southern tip of the peninsula, which is really great if you're wanting to do field work out there with migratory songbirds. And this is kind of what prompted the establishment of a long-term banding station there in the 60s. The Kiptike Banding Station, it was operated for about 50 years continuously. CVWO, who you guys were talking about a while ago, they spent a long time operating that banding station, and they still operate the Hawk Watch there. One of you guys, I can't remember which one, I think you had said you had been there when they opened in early September. Great place to go, great place to watch hawks. Center for Conservation Biology, my current employer, they've done several projects out there with songbirds as well as other species like owls. And then Old Dominion University, most recently, is working with songbirds out there. And they started working with broad-scale habitat use with migratory songbirds, and they're primarily trying to model what areas were really important based on radar data and matching that up to environmental variables. But they're also interested in tick-bird interaction, particularly ticks spreading Lyme disease, which you can see there on that Veery. There's a little tick right at the eyelid, and that's actually a pretty common place to find ticks on birds because it's a spot that the birds can't really get the tick off. So I've collected a fair number of ticks out there off birds like this Veery. But I was more interested in about 3 different things. First of all, I wanted to know what exactly the birds were eating. So I conducted foraging observations, and basically I just walked my transect and I looked at the bird. If they went and tried to eat something, I recorded what it was and whether they were successful and what species of plant it might have been on. I was interested in how these habitat components might influence plasma metabolite concentrations. And what I mean by that is, are these birds refueling or are they in poor condition? And you can tell this by looking at the bird's blood. So I would draw a little bit of blood from the bird. As you can see in that top left photo, there's a catbird. And with that blood, I can then look at how many triglycerides were in the blood, just like you may go to the doctor and the doctor may tell you your triglycerides are high. That's usually not a good thing for us, but for birds on migration, that's a great thing. The higher, the better. Birds have an incredible ability to accumulate fat, and triglycerides are their primary fuel. So the more fat they can get in their blood, the better. And I was also interested in uric acid concentrations. And uric acid is a metabolite. It's produced as a byproduct of protein metabolism. So if birds eating a lot of insects, they're going to have high uric acid concentrations. And then the last thing I was interested in for these birds that are eating insects, what's happening to the seeds? Where are they being dispersed? Because this is a very important component of plant establishment and plant community development. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but first we're going to talk about the songbirds that we actually were catching out there on the Eastern Shore and seeing foraging. The most common ones, I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. The myrtle warblers or yellow-rumped warblers is the most abundant songbird out on the Eastern Shore. They primarily arrive kind of halfway through the autumn migration, so you're not going to see those guys yet. Catbirds, there's a whole bunch of catbirds out there too. They haven't really arrived in numbers, I would imagine, but I bet if you go out there, you would see a lot of redstarts right now. And they're one of my favorite little songbirds. I love watching them forage. And I know you guys had that one on your quiz, which was nice. But those aren't all we were catching. We're catching flycatchers too. Here we have a great crested and an Acadian. Both of those breed in the area, but we get migrants as well. We would catch just about every type of vireo you could get. That middle vireo is a Philadelphia vireo. That's probably the our like highlight of working there. We only caught one of those ever, so it was a really cool one to catch. But I really love catching the blue-headed vireos as well. And then all kinds of warblers. As I'm sure all of you are aware, a lot of the warblers are much more difficult to identify during the fall than they are during the spring. And that's because the males aren't going into their spring breeding plumage yet. And a lot of the birds are young, especially out on the eastern shore. Most species of birds are about 90% hatchier birds or more. And when I say hatchier, that means birds that were hatched in the summer just a few months prior to migrating south. And you can see here, all of these are different species. We got about 7 different species, but most of them look pretty similar. Of course, these guys, we catch warblers that aren't just yellow and gray. The black and whites, I love catching these guys. They're actually really easy to sex and age. That one on the left, you can notice how crisp those black and whites are. That's actually a after hatchier or adult male. And then that right bird, you can see it's got a lot more buff on it. That is a hatchier or young female bird. And then we catch a lot of other birds. Catch the kinglets, sparrows. You can see a fox sparrow there. That was always a treat to catch. Occasionally we'll catch a woodpecker like that flicker. That was always a treat as well. And then brown creepers, it's one of my favorite birds. They're not real bright or anything, but just those colors in it and watching them forage, I always love that. And I worked in several different habitats. One of those habitats was a shrub scrub. This is typically a early successional field. A lot of times out on the eastern shore, especially on the southern tip, because that land is so important to migrant birds. There are different agencies like DGIF, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Nature Conservancy. They're all trying to buy land from the farmers there so that they can preserve it for these migratory songbirds. And what typically happens is they'll purchase an agricultural field and just let it grow up. And the first several years, it is what we call shrub scrub. There's also a salt scrub, and this is the area that's just up from the tidal zone. Both of these habitats have very similar structure, similar plant species that are within these habitats, and you'll find similar bird community composition as well. So what do birds eat in this habitat? Well, a lot of birds in these habitats are sparrows. So you get a bunch of song sparrows and swamp sparrows. And you have here saltbush. This is kind of the first shrub that you'll get in the salt scrub area above the tidal zone. And the song sparrows and swamp sparrows love eating the seeds out of here. I also saw goldfinch and blackbirds early on eating these seeds as well, but especially these song sparrows and swamp sparrows love the seeds. Eastern bacchus, that's another shrub slightly higher than the saltbush. And eastern bacchus is a shrub that flowers in the fall, and it actually attracts a lot of pollinators. And birds generally like to eat some pollinators. You know, there's some butterflies that are poisonous to songbirds, but these guys attract a lot of flies. And I would see a lot of birds foraging on bacchus. It's a really common plant. I mean, you'll see it on the side of the highway or any kind of shrubby habitat. But I would see birds primarily eating little things off the branch. I never could quite figure out what these birds were getting. My wife finally kind of told me, who also happened to be my technician on my project, she thought they were eating sap. So then I set about trying to get a photo of this, and sure enough, a lot of these birds were actually eating the sap from the bacchus. You see here a ruby-crowned kinglet gleaning that sap out of kind of the node where a twig breaks off from a main branch. And I would see a lot of yellow-rumped warblers doing this as well. I did a little bit of research, and there's actually another species of bird in South America that really enjoys bacchus sap, and that's the glossy flower piercer. But I haven't found anything about birds in North America eating bacchus sap. The glossy flower piercer, it'll actually maintain sap wells and just visit these bacchus shrubs all day long, just getting the sap. I didn't see any evidence of birds maintaining sap wells, but that would be really interesting to find out if they do or not. Another plant I would find in the shrub area quite often is goldenrod. I'm sure all of you are fairly familiar with it. It's a beautiful plant, and butterflies really love it. But not only butterflies, a lot of wasp species, beetle species, and fly species, you can find them on it. It's just really incredible. You know, the Eastern Shore of Virginia, it's not only a migratory bird hotspot, it's a butterfly hotspot. So I really encourage you to look at the butterflies out there. But I would really see a lot of palm warblers foraging on these goldenrod flowers. And I would never see them actually get an insect. So I always kind of suspected that they were eating the flowers, which I couldn't find any information about whether birds would eat these flowers or not. But once again, I finally got a photo of a bird eating the flower. And here you can see this palm warbler in that blown up photo on the right. It's got a little bitty goldenrod flower. And I think this is actually pretty common for these guys. It's the only species I really saw doing this, but palm warblers really love goldenrod. It's really quite interesting. And then you have wax myrtle, or bayberry, as some people say. This species produces a fruit, but the fruit supposedly has a chemical in it called a waxy ester that is almost indigestible to every bird species except for myrtle warblers or yellow-rumped warblers and tree swallows. And you don't typically think about tree swallows as eating fruits, but if you're ever out there in some of these shrub fields where there's a bunch of wax myrtle, you might get lucky enough to see a really extraordinary sight of the tree swallows just swarming these bayberry or wax myrtle fruits. And I actually have a video of this. It'll play. Here we go. This is actually down in Florida, not on the Eastern Shore. Here you have quite a few swallows. On the Eastern Shore, when the swallows are moving through, they can be in flocks of just hundreds of thousands, and it's really amazing. Good places to see these guys out on the Eastern Shore or Fisherman's Island, which is harder to get access to, but I would actually see these guys pretty frequently at Magothi Bay Natural Area Preserve. They have some really nice wax myrtle that produces a lot of fruit there. I definitely recommend going by there and checking it out if you get the chance. But interestingly, you know, there's even a paper dedicated to pointing out that this fruit is only eaten by yellow-rumped warblers and tree swallows. I actually saw several other species eating this, most prominently song sparrows, white-throated sparrows, gray catbirds, and common yellowthroats. And there you can see a song sparrow with a little bayberry or wax myrtle fruit in its bill. But wax myrtle is not the only fall fruiting plant. There are a lot of plants that produce fleshy fruits in the fall, particularly in forest. And that's because a lot of plants are trying to take advantage of the volume of songbirds that are moving through the area. And that's because songbirds are really effective seed dispersers. The goal of these plants is to have their seed eaten and placed somewhere where it's likely to grow into a new plant. And if these plants get their seed placed further away from the mother plant or the plant that produced the seed, that seed is more likely to grow into an adult plant and continue that cycle of life. And because of this, several plants have developed strategies to increase the likelihood that songbirds will eat their fruits. Here you can see a Virginia creeper leaf, and it's very red, and you can see how that contrasts with that dark purple berry. Some scientists have found that plants that do this are more likely to attract the birds because they're attracted to either those contrasting colors or just the bright red. And Virginia creeper is not the only plant that does this. Poison ivy, dogwood, sassafras all do this. They all produce these red flowers or red leaves towards the end of migration or towards migration when they have their fruits available. Another strategy is just to produce a ton of fruit. Here you can see an eastern red cedar, and it is just loaded with fruits. this particular tree was right across from our field housing, and all day long, once the yellow rumps and the robins were here, there'd just be 100 birds in that tree all day, just going back and forth and just devouring these berries. And towards the end of the season, this tree just looked completely haggard because these robins had been in this tree so much, they just broken every single branch that was not strong enough to hold them up. And then these plants can also produce high quality nutritional fruits to increase the likelihood that these birds will forage. This particular shrub is an arrowweed or viburnum. It's not very common on the southern eastern shore, but there are a few planted on the Eastern Shore of Virginia Wildlife Refuge, and the birds love these particular shrubs. In some stopover areas, particularly Block Island up in Rhode Island, they've done a lot of studies with this plant, and it produces, within these berries, there is a lot of really high quality fat, which is what the birds are going after. Pokeweed, on the other hand, doesn't have a whole lot of fat, but it has a nutrient that most fruits lack, and that's protein. For the most part, birds have to acquire protein from insects, but pokeweed is kind of the exception. Then you have some fruits like grapes. Some people have theorized that grapes are not beneficial at all to birds because there's so much water content within them that the bird's gut will just be filled with water rather than nutrients like sugars or fats. I see quite a few birds foraging on grapes. So while in theory, these guys may think this, but I think the birds are getting some nutrition because otherwise birds aren't going to eat something that's not going to be good for them. One of the funnier things I've seen watching these birds forage is black-throated blue, which is a relatively small warbler. And, you have the large grapes out here. It's about the same size as the black-throated blue warbler's head. And that black-throated blue warbler just kept trying to choke down that grape, but he just couldn't get it. He eventually had to spit the grape out. Poison ivy. This is a fruit that birds eat quite a bit, and you'll see small birds as small as kinglets eat it. You can see a chickadee there in the background, and I've seen birds as big as a pileated woodpecker eat it as well, and you see a flicker there eating it. Not a lot is known about the nutritional quality of poison ivy. I think that's primarily because most people who research this kind of thing, maybe they react to poison ivy and they just don't want to collect the seeds to find out how much fat and sugar is in it. But I've seen a wide variety of birds foraging on this particular fruit. Virginia creeper. We talked a little bit about how it has the red leaves during autumn, and here you can see a plate up there in the top right. That might be from Audubon, but a lot of birds really love Virginia creeper fruits. It's actually really nutritional as well as having the red leaves, and it provides a lot of good nutrients for these birds, particularly fats. Devil's walking stick. A lot of people think devil's walking stick is pretty nutritional, but it's actually middle of the road or a little less nutritional than a lot of the other fruits. But it produces a lot at one time, and they're all aggregated in one place. So it's easy to just gorge yourself on a lot of these fruits. And when these guys are ripe, you'll see a lot of thrushes on them and a lot of vireos. You can see a cardinal in that particular photo. Black cherry. Some of these fruits, maybe they produce high nutritional fruits, maybe they produce a whole bunch. Black cherry produces fruits in early migration. So they're pretty much gone by now, but right at the beginning of migration, in these places where you have a bunch of black cherry, you'll encounter these large foraging flocks of eastern kingbirds and orioles, and it's really cool to watch those flocks. Sassafras is another early season fruit. It's actually highly nutritional as well and produces those red leaves. It's very good for birds, but the birds love it so much, it's gone in like a week. It gets ripe and it's gone right away. The birds just devour it. And then American holly, on the other end of the spectrum, isn't really consumed much during most of migration, not till later migration when a lot of robins are around and waxwings. And during the winter, it's especially important. I'm sure many of you have seen on a snowy day just how many birds can flock to an American holly tree. Never park underneath one of these trees on a snowy day. You will definitely regret that. And then the last fruit I'm going to talk about is hackberry. Hackberry is a fruit that is not very nutritional. In fact, it's almost at the bottom in most of the nutritional studies you'll read. And if you look at those berries in the background, you can see it's just got a very thin outer shell, And underneath that shell, it has a very thin layer of pulp. And if you pop these in your mouth, they do taste sweet, but there's barely anything to them. Once you get past the pulp, it's just a giant seed. And if you think about a bird, if it eats these hackberry fruits, it's basically taking up all the room in its gut with seeds, so it can't actually eat good nutritional fruits. But as I was doing my foraging surveys, I found that a lot of birds are eating hackberry fruits. And not only were a lot of birds eating hackberry fruits, I was catching a lot of hackberry seeds in my seed traps. And it was a variety of birds I would find, but you can see cardinals, robins, and catbirds ate the majority of them. But, you know, I even saw red-eyed vireos eating these hackberry fruits. And we'll return to that here in a minute, but before that, we'll talk about birds and how they also eat insects. You know, I mentioned those redstarts earlier, and I love watching redstarts forage. I got well over 100 foraging observations on redstarts. I never had a redstart eating a fruit. And same thing with black and white warblers. There are several other species that are like this where I just never saw them eat a fruit. So these birds during migration are eating a lot of insects, and a lot of these birds that primarily eat fruit, they still have to get some protein somewhere, and usually that's from insects. Hackberry also provides a lot of insects. Particularly, they provide, they're the lone larval food for hackberry emperors, tawny emperors, and American snouts. And there you can see some, I believe those are snout caterpillars on a hackberry leaf up there. But as I'm watching these birds forage on hackberry trees, mostly I don't think they're getting these caterpillars. What they seem to be getting are much smaller. And what I think they are these hackberry psyllids, or hackberry gall makers as they're also called. And we have 3 species here in this general area. We have the star gall, which you can see that arrow pointing to. You can actually differentiate these species by gall morphology. The glabrous nipple gall, and then the largest psyllid, which creates the largest gall, the disc gall. And if you try to look up information on hackberry psyllids, you're not going to really find a whole lot about how they provide food for songbirds. What you're primarily going to find is how these guys are a pest and how to kill them. And it's not because they are biting insect or they're killing plants. They really don't even kill the hackberry trees that they parasitize. These hackberry psyllids are reviled as pests in some areas because they're just the right size to slip in through your screens. They're usually about 2 to 5 millimeters. So if you have a screen window that's open, that hackberry psyllid in the fall, it may be seeking some shelter and just come inside your house. It's just looking for a warm place to stay. And it's looking for that warm place to stay in the fall because of its life cycle. Right now, you might actually be able to find some hackberry psyllids available. It's a little early, but there might be a few. But basically in the winter, these guys are dormant. They don't do anything. They just kind of wait out the winter. Usually they're hiding in leaf litter or in crevices of bark. And then in the spring, when it starts to warm up, these guys, they come out and they start mating and they start laying eggs on hackberry leaves. After they lay their egg, their duty in life is done and they die. They just live a single year. That egg, though, it'll hatch, a larvae will emerge, and that larvae starts eating the hackberry tree. And when I say eating, it's actually sucking onto the hackberry tree and sucking the phloem out of the leaf. As it sucks onto that leaf, the leaf, because it's very young leaf, it grows over the hackberry psyllid larvae, and that's what forms the gall. All throughout the summer, that hackberry psyllid is protected within the gall, and it just keeps maturing and growing and sucking on the plant juices. During fall, those leaves are getting close to falling off the tree. That hackberry psyllid will crawl out of the gall and do its final molt, and then try to find a hiding place again for the winter. So these hackberry psyllids are really only available for 2 brief periods. In the spring, when the leaves are just starting to grow, and then in the fall, right before the leaves start to fall off the tree. There was a fellow in Illinois who did a study on foraging birds, and he was looking at what trees the birds were using to forage. And he found that in this period when the hackberry psyllids are available, birds loved hackberry trees. And you can see that here's a 3-year study. On the left column of those little charts over there, that top bar, that represents hackberry trees. And that top one, you see that 62, essentially that means the birds are foraging in hackberry trees 62% of the time more than you would expect given how much hackberry was in the forest. But once the hackberry psyllids disappeared, the hackberry or the warblers, they didn't really like hackberry anymore. So these hackberry psyllids were influencing the foraging behavior at a spring stopover site. So I wanted to know if something similar was going on at my sites in the fall. And sure enough, it was. You know, I went out, I measured how much hackberry was on my transects, and birds loved hackberry trees. You can see a parula up there in that top right, foraging on hackberry trees. Those tree species, that goes from the most abundant to the least abundant. So you see sweet gum was most abundant on my surveys. Birds really didn't really like sweet gum very much. The only other tree that I really seemed to see a lot of birds in, more than you would expect, was the southern red oak. And a lot of times these were insectivores. Red starts really love southern red oak. And I think that's because the red oak was also producing a lot of insects. And there's a variety of species that really like these hackberry trees. And you can see there, the parula, as you just saw that picture, about 55% more of the time than you would expect, you would see these parulas foraging on hackberry trees. But it's not, parulas are pretty much exclusively insectivorous, as are ruby crown kinglets, which are the second most, the bird that likes them the second most. But you can see there's birds that like fruits, birds that like fruits and insects, as well as the insectivores that like hackberry trees. So, you know, I'm trapping these birds, I'm looking at their blood. I found that these birds are preferring the hackberry trees, but does that actually result in the birds having increased capacity to refuel near these hackberry trees? And it depends. For the frugivores, it didn't matter at all. But for birds that consumed insects, the mean triglycerol or fat concentration in the bird blood was about twice as high when hackberry was present. But as far as whether they're consuming insects, is a little more complicated. You see those two charts on the left, the A and the B. The A represents the time before hackberry psyllids are abundant or available before they emerge from their galls. You can see it's pretty much the same. That blue line and shaded area represent when hackberry is present, and the red area represents when hackberry is not present. It doesn't really matter early in migration. But once the hackberry psyllids are available, you can see the areas where hackberry is not present, the uric acid concentrations drop quite a bit. Whereas where hackberry is present, they remain relatively the same, but there's quite a big difference. And I think that's because as autumn progresses, the temperatures cool and insect abundance in general declines. And you can see this little graph on the right. I had sticky traps out and I quantified when the hackberry psyllids were available, as well as other species. And hackberry psyllids belong to a taxa called Homoptera. Other Homoptera, you can see they peak kind of late September, whereas hackberry psyllids, they don't peak until a little bit later, kind of mid-October. So it seems like these hackberry trees are good for the birds. The birds forage a lot in these trees because of that, but does that actually affect any seed dispersal patterns? Well, I mentioned this was something I was interested in, so I had placed seed traps in a variety of places, about 140 of them in interior forests, as well as in some shrub fields surrounding some hackberry trees. I also mentioned that I had these sticky traps out throughout the shore to quantify when the hackberry psyllids were available. And you see it's not exactly a smooth curve when the hackberry psyllids were available. A lot of this has to depend on the weather. So if it got really warm or really cold, different things might happen, or really rainy. But you can see there's kind of the early peak in late September, but then hackberry psyllids are most abundant around mid-October. So what about hackberry seeds? Are hackberry seeds more likely to be dispersed when the hackberry psyllids are most abundant? And it turns out hackberry seeds followed the pattern of hackberry psyllid temporal availability really well. And as hackberry psyllid capture rate increased, hackberry seeds collected increased as well. So it seems like maybe these hackberry psyllids are attracting these birds to the hackberry tree, which in turn, these birds are eating these hackberry fruits in addition to the psyllids and subsequently dispersing the seeds in the surrounding habitat. But what about other seeds? In particular, I was interested in grape, Virginia creeper, and poison ivy. And that is because these are the three fruiting species that I most commonly saw birds consuming, and I most commonly collected out of my seed traps. There you can see in that top right, I am collecting a Virginia creeper seed out of there. And while the fruiting seeds didn't quite match up quite as well as the hackberry seeds with both those peaks, the vast majority of the fruit seeds were dispersed when hackberry psyllids were most available. So you can see there in this chart on the right that as hackberry psyllid capture rate increases, so does the seed disperse. And you can see there's red and blue. I actually had my traps at two different sites, Cape Charles Natural Area Preserve and Savage Neck Dunes Natural Area Preserve. Savage Neck Dunes had very few seeds in general, and you see that Cape Charles site had quite a few more. But not only did the temporal patterns match up, the further away from hackberry you got, the fewer seeds you would collect in these forests. So it seems that these hackberry trees are attracting the songbirds, which are in turn dispersing the seeds of fruits that they have eaten in other places near the hackberry trees. So that these areas with hackberry trees are actually kind of the centralized location where these seeds are being dispersed and presumably can grow up to be adult fruiting plants near the hackberry trees. So what I found was hackberry was a preferred foraging tree, and it benefited birds that consume insects, and it also affected these seed dispersal patterns. But why does this matter? Well, there's a lot of literature out there on how to benefit these native birds, and particularly migratory birds in the autumn. And most of this literature is focused on how to provide fruits, which fruits are great. You know, a lot of birds do eat fruits, and it provides a great source of nutrition for a lot of these birds. But there's basically nothing about how to increase insect abundance in these areas. So hackberry trees represent a great alternative to fruits, but it's really not even an alternative because they produce fruits also. Even if they're not the most nutritious, they provide something for these frugivores. But it's a great way to increase insect abundance. But hackberry is not the only plant that may be like this. There's a lot of other plants that produce galls. Here we have a leaf of a black cherry. I don't know how many of you have looked at black cherry leaves before, but especially towards the autumn, a lot of these will have these really interesting growths on them. And these are a gall as well. These aren't caused by an insect as big as the hackberry psyllids. These are actually caused by a mite. And mites are really tiny, but mites provide food to other insects, and other insects provide food to bigger insects, which birds do eat, like spiders. Some birds really love spiders. Oaks, as I mentioned, the southern red oak, birds seem to really like the southern red oak, particularly American redstarts. And that's probably because southern red oaks are the exclusive host to a variety of wasp taxa. Here you can see one of these little ones here. It's not all that big, but you know, a redstart isn't a very big bird in the first place. So it just needs to eat a lot of these little wasps, and it can acquire quite a bit of fuel. Black locust is another native tree that hosts specific insects that will create galls in their leaves. Goldenrod, I talked a little bit about them. They actually have a fly that is responsible for a gall that forms along the main stem. If you guys ever inspect some goldenrod stems, you're likely to see some of these. They're very bulbous looking, but if you dig inside them, once it gets cooler, you'll actually see the fly larva within it. And then it's not just galls. Eastern red cedar, bagworms really enjoy making their cocoons out of eastern red cedar, and bagworms emerge during autumn also and would provide a really great source of nutrition for migrating songbirds. So my research was basically looking at how particular plant species can provide an insect resource rather than a fruit resource for these migrating songbirds. I have a lot of people to thank: Coastal Virginia Wildlife Observatory, VSO, Virginia Academy of Science. They all helped fund my research. Department of Conservation and Recreation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, CCB. They all were really instrumental in providing me various things, and technicians and volunteers as well. I couldn't have done it without them. So if any of you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Chance.
Yes.
So I was curious, when you're looking at the various species of gall-making insects, are the birds feeding on the galls, or are they just hanging around hoping that an emergence is occurring?
Right. That's a very good question. So first of all, yes, there's one species of bird that is actually digging the larvae out of the galls. And they only do this right before the insects start emerging. Those are chickadees. You know, I saw this happen several times, and when you see it happening, they'll just go back and forth, and they'll go grab a leaf, perch on a branch, and peck it out, get it, and go get another one. But for the most part, these birds are just waiting until these galls are there. And these galls are super abundant. If you ever go look at a hackberry tree and you find one that has a lot of galls on it, some of these leaves will have 50 or 60 galls. But on average, I was having, 2 or 3 galls per leaf. And if you think about a whole tree full of leaves, they all emerge, at a very similar time. It's thousands, maybe even millions, of insects. If you have some of these areas like the Eastern Shore of Virginia National Wildlife Refuge, there's a lot of hackberry down there. I can't imagine the total numbers of insects that are in there, the actual psyllids, but it's got to be millions and millions.
When you were doing your yellow sticky trapping, were you getting very high density of those other gall-making insects as well?
No, I was actually, I don't think I captured the hackberry psyllids quite as well as I would have liked to. I got a lot of the other Homoptera. They seem to really be attracted to the yellow, but I had read that some other psyllids down in Florida really like that yellow color. I think all my psyllids that I caught up here, my hackberry psyllids, were actually just, I got lucky and they landed on it. I don't think they were actually attracted to it. But I wasn't getting a lot of other gall-forming organisms. I got a bunch of leafhoppers and sharpshooters. I don't know if y'all are familiar with them, but I think those species are really good for birds as well.
Yeah, so my background's in entomology, so that's why I was asking those few things. Because I think if you potentially would have swept net the vegetation, you probably would have picked up things like the other species, particularly the cynipids and other parasitic wasps that aren't necessarily being attracted to that.
Yeah, I did pick up a few parasitic. I picked up everything basically to some degree, but my initial goal was just to quantify the hackberry psyllid abundance, which it still worked as far as getting the general trend. It's not going to tell me how many total are out in the environment though.
Yeah, I'm just curious because, going out sweeping and just looking for stuff in general, I filter past groups that I'm not particularly interested in, but you still notice, man, I picked up a lot of ladybird beetles today or something like that.
Yeah, I would actually pick up quite a few ladybird beetles as well.
Yeah, I'm just curious how much the actual biomass is for some of those gall-making insects.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think I got like 12,000 insects or something like that by the end of the season. But
cool.
I was only interested in the one thing. I quantified everything, but not presenting it all.
So you're getting some questions from the chat. One is, Nadina berries toxic to birds? What about other species of holly?
Sorry, are what toxic to birds?
Nandina? I don't know if that's how you say that, Barb. Nandina species toxic to birds? What about other species of holly?
Oh, other species of holly? No, I don't think so. I see birds eating all kinds of holly, so I think it's okay. Some species of fruits are toxic to some birds. It's like I was talking about the wax myrtle fruits. We think of birds as being one group, but it's just like mammals where, a mouse can eat a lot of different things that we can't. So there are some types of birds that can eat some fruits and some types of birds that can eat other fruits.
Okay, Chance, you also had a question asking you about, since butterflies and other insects are using hackberries, should hackberry leaves be mulched?
I think most of these butterflies that are using the hackberry leaves are primarily in the growing season, but I would think it'd probably be okay, but I really don't know that.
No, I think you're right, Chance, because they're using it to either eat on the foliage themselves or suck out all the sap for amino acids and sugars. So by the time they fall off, they're not useful. So if you haven't hatched out yet, as you said, to overwinter, you're not going to continue your life cycle.
Right. And generally with these gall makers, some of them I think do emerge after the leaves fall out. But once these galls get wet, a lot of them rot and then it doesn't matter.
Another question that you had is, I noticed on one of your slides that you work with gardeners and nurseries to promote trees, bushes that provide nutritional value for birds. Are you working with any locally?
No, I'm not, but I know Norfolk will give away native plants as well as fruiting plants in the springtime. And I've taken advantage of that to get a couple native plants for my yard.
Are there other questions for Chet? Again, feel free to use the chat as well as your audio.
Hey, Sean, it's Bill. About the Nandina berries, I had thought they were poisonous, so I Googled it real quick. And they contain cyanide and other alkaloids, which are highly toxic.
Okay.
So they're extremely poisonous.
Yeah, I didn't understand the genus there, but yeah, I've noticed that as well. I've never seen a bird eat an Andina berry.
So another question that came in is, you mentioned the birds are generally not fans of mites as food. Are there any locals which are?
Fans of mites. I think the problem is the mites are just so small that it's not worth it for the bird to go after. They're just really tiny organisms.
So there just isn't much of the tiny biomass among mites.
Right.
Thank you.
Anything else? Someone's asking, would the Norfolk Botanical Gardens is where they're giving away plants?
I think it's actually Norfolk. You know, there's an extension center down there. If you're on the internet, I would just search Norfolk native plant giveaway or something like that, and I'm sure you can find it. It might be the Norfolk Native Plant Society also.
Okay. Any other questions going once? Twice? You're getting some positive feedback throughout everything, talking about how wonderful your talk was, and I fully agree. It was nice to hear about some bird, insect, and plant interactions, a complex web of life that we live in. So thanks again, Chance. Thank everyone for attending this evening. Hopefully, as our first kickstart back into having meetings, it went fairly well. We had a wonderful talk to start off, and it set the tone for the rest of the year, I think. And it was nice to see everyone, or at least interact with you all once again. And I do apologize for the upfront bit that was a little bit long, but I think we all had fun. So thank everyone again, and hopefully I'll catch you in the real world sometime.
Yep.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
Great talk, Chance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Chance, I just sent you an email. I
Okay.
know this is short notice. I sent you a formal request. So this semester I'm teaching conservation biology, and I tried to get some people from the Center for
CCB?
Yep, CCB. But no one replied to me. I did that back in May when I think things were still a little bit busy. But I haven't gotten that many people to come and talk to my students. So I teach at Hampton University, which is an HBCU, and the majority of our students tend to be biomedical in orientation. And so they don't get exposed to that many scientists. So something that I've really been pushing over the years, but now that things are, more online, is to have people come in and talk about actual science and some of the things that the world outside going to med schools doing. So
Right.
I sent you an email if you happen to have time on Tuesday, Thursdays from 9:30 to 10:45 is when my class is.
Okay.
That I would enjoy you coming and talking to that class. There's only a few students that took Con Bio with me, but
Yeah, I can do that. It doesn't really matter which Tuesday or Thursday. It
Okay.
is just this semester sometime.
Yep. Yeah. So
Okay.
there's a date. So October 8th is out, which I also put in the letter. And then I have a friend that works as a medical entomologist in Delaware, but she's really flexible. So she'll fill in another date connecting wildlife to conservation to diseases and that nice story that goes on, especially given COVID now.
Yeah, I can totally do that.
Yep, I appreciate it. And you don't have to necessarily make something new. I think this is fine too, to talk about all the connections. Because again, their background is more molecular biology, and
Right.
we were talking about the lions in the Gorgo crater and inbreeding and all that, and they just had no idea about anything. So it's a brand new.
Yeah, I've given multiple kind of spin-offs to other undergrad classes and stuff, so I can do something.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I'll email you about format, or it may even be in the email you send me and stuff.
Okay, yeah.
That sounds great.
All right, awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yep, so I'm ending for everyone else who's here. So if you needed something, say something now. I'm signing off. All right. Bye, guys.